Ron got hammered the night before his Knicks workout. He said he went to the Flamingo, which is actually in New Jersey, got absolutely obliterated, woke up the next day, was still too drunk to function, called his agent and asked him, can you postpone the workout with the Knicks? Because they're going to take me anyway, so what does it matter?
Welcome to Beyond the Lens. I am Seth Shapiro.
And I'm AJ Speaks.
Born and bred in the streets of New York City, Johnny Sweet's love of hip-hop music and sports propelled him into a career in sports media. A Syracuse grad, Johnny paid his dues at ESPN before going out on his own, where he produced stories for the NFL, Fox Sports, and Bleacher Report. Johnny then directed 2 big-time docs, one about Michael Vick, and then the one we will talk about today, the Emmy-nominated Quiet Storm, the Ron Artest Story.
Johnny breaks down every detail of the Malice in the Palace, including some stories you've probably never heard before. He tells us how he was able to secure interviews for some of Ron's former teammates, including the late great Kobe Bryant. And the former DJ shares with us his favorite 5 rappers of all time. Here is Beyond the Lens by Diesel Films.
Big show today. He's directed films about Michael Vick and Ron Artest. He's won some Emmys, and he's a showrunner for Untold Stories for Bleacher Report. We welcome Johnny Sweet to Beyond the Lens. Johnny, what's happening?
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Jay Sweet, it's a pleasure having you on, man.
So, Johnny, in the first act, we'd like to talk about your story. Where did you grow up, and talk about your love of storytelling?
I grew up on 90th and Amsterdam in Manhattan in New York City. Public school kid. I was lucky. I grew up in a very rich cultural musical era. I was basically born into rap music. When I was 15, we moved out to the Hastings-Yonkers border. That's why I'm wearing this. Because when I was out there in the late 90s, was right, and 98 was my junior year of high school. And I don't know if people remember, 98 was the year that DMX took over not just rap music, but the whole music world with 2 #1 albums.
Rest in peace, DMX. Rest in peace, DMX.
From there, I was able to get a small enough of an academic ride to go to Syracuse for their Newhouse journalism program. Went straight from there to, I was still DJing for a little while in order to, pay some bills, but then went to ESPN for 10 years, got probably the best storytelling training I could have ever gotten. They kicked my ass, but in a good way. I learned from so many great people. Went out west for a couple of years, NFL Network, and then came back east for Turner and Bleacher Report. Gave up life on the beach. Sometimes I still think I made the wrong choice, but my mom's happy. My wife's happy, so that's all that matters. From there, that led to Michael Vick and Ron and other future projects and stuff like that. So hopefully that wasn't too long of a tangent.
Oh, good. I want to dive into something because I relate to you in this way. How much of an influence did the music have on you, especially hip hop in that 90s era, have on you in your career as you moved on? Like, how did that influence you, or even in your life? How did that influence you?
I mean, it influenced everything. It influenced my storytelling. I grew up listening to great storytellers. I grew up listening to Nas. I grew up listening to Big. I grew up listening to Mr. Cheeks, who no one ever talks about, who probably might be the most underrated storyteller out of that era. I really grew up in a lucky time period where all these great MCs were surrounding me with stories and tales and, not just what they were rapping about, but in the rhythm that they were rapping in. And I think that obviously had a huge influence on the storyteller that I'm still trying to become.
I wanted to ask you about getting into ESPN. Did you have a famous Al Jaffe interview story, or talk about that process of getting the job at ESPN, which is obviously the most, competitive places to work at?
Al didn't interview me. Fred Brown did. Al had just stepped down from doing that. Fred had just stepped in. And when I went in for my interview, I was just like, don't ask me about hockey. Don't ask me about hockey. Don't ask me about hockey. And they didn't ask me about hockey, so I felt fine. They asked me about, you don't have like a written test because you're going studio production. They don't give you a written test, or at least when I was there, they didn't do it. I don't know what they do nowadays, but they just ask you 3 random questions and see if what you have off the top of your dome. So I remember they asked me, what's the strength of the Philadelphia 76ers? And I said, well, outside of Iverson, their bench led by Aaron McKee. I remember they asked me about the Jacksonville Jaguars defense, and I said they ran a 3-4 zone blitz scheme. And I forget the third one, but yeah, so he was like, well, looks like you know your shit. Maybe we'll give you a call. And I was like, okay. So I drove back home and I was like, I guess I'm going to be DJing for a little while longer. But then, I got a call 6 weeks later and they're like, want to come up here and be an entry-level PA? And I was like, where do I sign?
So take me a little bit further. When did your big break come in the industry? What was it? Tell us that story.
Well, define big break.
So I guess for me, it would be that turning point where you went from, say, maybe PA to, hey, I'm headed in this direction where, now obviously you're an award-winning filmmaker. So what helped lead you to where you are now?
I did a feature on the 5-year anniversary of Sean Taylor's passing. When you're at ESPN, they teach you how to do a lot of things the right way, but it's also they're teaching you how to do a lot of things a very dogmatic way, which is, it's not right or wrong. It's just they have a way of doing things. It can be tough there to find your own voice that stands out. The reason why that one for me stood out was I was finally able to convince them I could tell a story without relying on the crutch of a narrator like a Tom Rinaldi or, another one of their gifted writers. I wanted the raw voices of these interviews to talk about Sean. And I knew I had that when I interviewed Santana Moss, and he broke down right there in the middle of the Redskins practice facility. And we held on to that moment for a really long time, which was an uncomfortable moment, but that's where the training with ESPN helps, because they always tell you, wait 3 to 5 seconds after every answer. And if it looks like they're about to break down and talk about more, wait an eternity. That piece was when I was like, okay, maybe I don't suck. Maybe I might be okay going down this lane and improving and getting better and better. So I'd say that was probably the moment.
When did you get the confidence to be able to go freelance and know you would be successful?
I don't know if it was really common. You just have to you have to walk the plank and see what happens. I didn't have a lot of work lined up, but I wanted to take a risk. I also wanted to go to LA. I didn't want to spend more time in the middle of central Connecticut. I love my time there. Don't get me wrong. I love ESPN. I love, the storyteller that they turned me into be. from a cultural standpoint, I couldn't stay in central Connecticut much longer. I needed something different. So I wanted to go out to LA and test my waters out there. And I was able to do that. And, that's where I went to NFL Network. And that's how I know Anthony Smith. I was able to work a lot with Mark Kriegel, who I think is the best sports writer in the industry. That's just my personal subjective opinion. So I guess that's how that led to that. But really, my confidence in getting into the freelance market more came after the Artest film. Once I had the Artest film done, now I had something I could build off of in a larger way.
It's a natural segue to dive into what is Act 2 for us, which is about the Ron Artest film. There's so many. Listen, I love the film. I really love the film. And 3 minutes in, you already played Mobb Deep and Nas. I was like, yo, hold up. But I'm gonna backtrack. I'm gonna pull it back here. Okay. How did you get that film? How did that whole thing, that process happen to where, hey, Johnny, you're the one telling this story?
Well, we had done a film on Michael Vick prior to that. Ron liked that film. So after he watched that, I was able to get Ron's attention with a good buddy of mine who's also a producer on the film, Omar Mashad. So Omar hit him up, got us together. The three of us talked about what we were trying to execute. So that's really it's a credit to Omar. Omar built the bridge. So that's how that got there.
Bridge, no pun intended, but we're going to dive into Queensbridge. and I got to ask you, the title of the title of me screamed the first song that you played. So I was wondering when it was going to come, but how did you get to that title? Was it a working title? Did you have something else named first? Like, how did that work?
I had a shitty title before that called Absence of Malice, and I'm glad it never went. But, sometimes it takes months to realize your idea is stupid. When we were interviewing Coach Jarvis had said, he's quiet like a storm building. And I was like, oh, it's the fucking Mobb Deep song. Having lived above him, on the third floor. So I was like,
no brainer.
And then, I hit up Hav before we interviewed him. I'm like, would you be all right if, we use this as a title? And he was like, I don't care. That's going to lead to more streams and shit. So
nice.
So,
probably, that's the coldest opening titles of a sports documentary that I've ever seen.
Hey, if you guys are happy, I'm happy.
My God.
It was a really tough decision for me whether to use the lyrics or not, but I thought the instrumental alone was colder. So
listen, I'm gonna skip to the end though, because when you drop Kim at the end, I'm like, oh, you had to do it. You had to go back and bring it back. So it was great. I tell you what though, it was funny because I was wondering where Bill Walton was coming from. Like you started with him and I'm just like, where's Bill Walton in this? And I realized he was the analyst on the fight. So that's why you started with him is the answer that I answered for myself, correct?
Yeah. We wanted to get Jim Gray. We couldn't. So, Tom Friend, who is the writer and a lot of the journalistic backbone to this film, has a good rapport with Bill. So we were able to, that's one of the interviews that he was able to land. So that's how we got Bill. No, I mean, we only wanted Bill because he was a witness.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of the interviews, you really had some great interviews that went, the extra mile, from Kobe to Donnie Walsh to Mike Jarvis, really talking about Ron's, chemical imbalance. Did Ron give those people the blessing to kind of speak openly about his, anxiety, depression, his mental illness? Because sometimes when you talk about those things with coaches and athletes, you only get surface level type stuff, but these guys went deep.
No, Ron didn't have any editorial control of the film. So we went and interviewed who we felt we needed to interview in order to tell the most objective story possible. With Ron, certain areas we didn't go to, like we didn't want to interview any of his kids. They're minors. Didn't want to subject. That wasn't fair. His ex-wife turned us down, so we couldn't get her. But no, everybody spoke freely. No one, to my knowledge, no one checked in with Ron about prior to their interviews on what they felt comfortable talking about.
So they knew going in that the subject matter was going to be some or most of the subject matter was going to be about Ron's mental illness.
We didn't make any journalistic deals. We told them we're going to talk about anything and everything, pertaining to Ron, and no one backed off. Everyone was willing to talk openly about whatever we asked them. So
that's dope.
I'm going to go back to the hip hop because as you're rolling out the guest, I'm just sort of looking at my TV like, oh, hold up. First, you drop Fredro, then you drop Hav, then you drop Nori, and at first I didn't recognize Nori until you put his name up again. Then you drop. What'd you say?
He's got great teeth now. His veneers.
Oh yeah, I noticed that too. I noticed the great teeth. But then you drop Mr. Cheeks, and I'm like, yo, holy shit! How'd you get all these rappers? And why was it important for you to include them in his story?
I'll tell you how we got all the rappers. Omar Mashad. Omar is just a talent producer on steroids. But that's all him. The reason why I felt they were important was because Ron grew up. Queens during that time, and this is the best comparison I can make it. I don't even know if it's a good one. Queens to rap music at that time was like what Nashville is to country music. So, we can go down the list of all the people that came out of that era in Queens. You go LL Cool J, Tribe Called Quest, Run DMC, Marley Marr, Nas, Deep, Onyx, Lost Boys. There's Worldwide Flush, Cool G Rap. And on the tail end of that, you get Nicki Minaj. So, it's the Hall of Fame of rap music talent. The only other era, look, rap music is subjective. All music is subjective. The only other territory I can think of that had a bigger impact during that time period, a little later, maybe might have been the 757 area code of Virginia Beach when Timbaland, Teddy Riley, and Pharrell and Jack Hugo came out of that era. But and also part of Ron's destruction with the Pacers was because he was obsessed with trying to get his label off the ground. He was suspended prior to the beginning of that season when they started 6-2, and then, Detroit changed everything. But, if he doesn't grow up in that era, does he really push to try and get his label off the ground and get, Allure's album up? And he went about all the wrong ways of trying to promote it, but that's one of the many reasons why that team self-destructed.
And I left off my man Capone. Capone said that, hey, leave that rap game alone. But I forgot my man Capone when I was shouting him out. It was really well done. I thought you did a good job weaving that story in and tying it in. Because for me, that's my youth, right? So it's like you're sucked in. I was sucked in, just sort of like, man, this is so good to hear all these people tell their perspective.
Yeah, and also a lot of the stories that, like, when you listen to Illmatic, a lot of the stories really pertain to kids like Ron who grew up in that era. And also that era was surrounded by some of the biggest crack kingpins ever, from Cream to Fat Cat to Pappy Mason, etc. The killing of Eddie Byrne changed New York forever. That's where the NYPD really ramped up a lot of their excessive police tactics, which still resonate today. That time period is crazy. It's just absolutely crazy in Queens, that time period.
It's okay. No one's from Brooklyn here, so we got no retorts. I really like the way you use the quote boards from Dr. Santi, Ron's psychologist. Why did you choose to use her in that fashion and not interview her and put her in the doc as an interview?
She did not want to be on camera, and she didn't want her voice heard. And the reason being is she has a practice to protect. By doing that, she felt like she could be endangering the trust of her other clients. And by doing that, so we had to find a creative way to parlay that important information in a comprehensive manner for the viewer to be able to, absorb it. That was really the best way that we can do it. And aesthetically, we wanted to keep the look consistent with kind of the feel of the open. That was why we chose to do it. We did get Ron's permission to talk to his psychologist. So.
Speaking of creativity, I love the part when, I thought his father's interviews were really good, but I like the part when you talked about them playing in the snow and the battles that they had, and you went with that whole theme of snow and someone playing. Where did that come from? How did that come about?
We had to wait for an actual blizzard to come, and we had to shoot it early in the morning because if you just start whipping out random cameras in Queensbridge,
it's not a good look.
Well, they're used to cameras being there because there's so many music videos that have been shot there. And then, the Roxanne Shante Netflix film was shot there. But at least early in the morning, it's not as populous. And we wanted a very isolated area. So we waited for a blizzard. And then Rick, one of our camera guys, is actually playing Ron in the snow. I'm not one for reenactments. I actually hate them 95% of the time. I think it sucks out a lot of the authenticity. But, back then, cameras were insanely expensive. Families didn't really have footage like, everyone has now because everyone has a cell phone. So, that's one of the rare occasions where we did a reenactment. I usually hate doing them, but
I thought it worked. I really do. I thought it worked. I'm not a fan of them all the time either, but when they work, they work. And in this case, it worked.
Well, again, you guys are happy. I'm happy.
I agree. I mean, just the drama of the snow and the reenactment of the hoops, it was pretty dope. In 2000, I was working at the Garden, and the Knicks had the 15th pick, and we see Ron Artest, the hometown hero, fall to them at 15, and then Dave Checketts doesn't take Ron, takes Frederick Weiss. To me, the organization has been jinxed ever since, maybe till this year, and then Ron goes to the Bulls at 16. What was there any backstory? You didn't really cover that in the doc. I was just wondering if there was any backstory to that. I've heard him later on say he was wearing a Knicks jersey at the draft that night, and
yeah, that's one of the things that hit the cutting room floor. Ron got hammered the night before his Knicks workout. He said he went to the Flamingo, which is actually in New Jersey, got absolutely obliterated. Woke up the next day, was still too drunk to function, called his agent and asked him, can you postpone the workout with the Knicks? Because they're going to take me anyway, so what does it matter? His agent did that. The Knicks took note, and that's why they didn't draft him. Yeah,
I didn't know if there was any inside info from Jarvis to Knicks brass or any of that type of stuff going on as far as the mental stuff.
No, that's the sole reason why they did not take him. Now, why they would take the guy who Vince Carter flew over, I still don't know why, but that's the sole reason why they didn't take him.
I believe it 100%. Working for an NBA team, I can tell you 4 or 5 stories of the same thing. Guys work out, they complain about their injuries during the workout, and then the team's like, I'm not taking this dude. There's so many things that just tie into that. So that's a good story. I was not aware of the backstory of Ron getting skipped on for that reason.
Yeah, I didn't want to. We didn't put it in because we were trying to keep the main theme about his psyche, and if we felt like if we put that in, it just would have been this random entertaining tangent, but it would have veered the message of the film off course. So,
The decision to interview him in front of a boxing ring, which looked great. Why did you choose that? How many times did you sit him down? Walk us through that process.
Sat him down once for about 4 hours. That's all. The boxing ring was symbolic because fighting has been a symbolic thing that has, surrounded him his entire life, both from fighting as a youngster to fights in the NBA. Also, it's a subliminal ode to his dad, who was a Golden Gloves fighter. That's why we chose that. We also chose it because it was 5 minutes away from where he lived. It was easy to get him there.
Hey, you got to avoid the traffic in LA. In
a spot where we could light the shit out of it beforehand. So all he has to do is walk in, get mic'd up, and let's go. We got about 4 hours with this guy. We got to get his, interviews, get as much out of him as possible.
Was he done at the beginning or the end of the production?
He was beginning. He was the domino effect was post his interview.
The malice at the palace, the brawl. Any revelations for you covering that in the documentary?
I did not know that when he laid down on the scores table that he was executing a mental health exercise. I thought he was just trying to be a dick. But we contacted the Pacers psychiatrist at the time, and they verified it. That's what he was doing. So, when Ron told us that, it was the truth. So that was correct. And he was trying to go to his happy place.
I got to back up for a second because there's so many Ron stories, right? So I had always heard the Circus City story. I never knew if it was really true. I know there was a picture of him with a TV on his shoulder saying that he wanted a discount from Circus City. And then you dove into this story on the Malice in the Palace. And I had forgotten the whole Ben Wallace throwing all his wristbands at him. And all of these things that kind of triggered Ron, right? It's just like, I thought you guys did a really good job of telling the story and explaining how many times it seemed like it was dying down and then something else would happen. If it wasn't him throwing his stuff, then the guy decides he's going to throw a cup. Like that part of it to me were a lot of revelation where I'm like, I forgot all of those things. And then when it seemed like it was dying down again, the guy punches Ron. It's just like, yo, man, they wouldn't let it go.
Look, I can't say what I would or would not do in that situation. I'd say right now, as a 40-year-old man, I'd be a lot calmer. But as someone who is Ron's age and in that, peak of physical condition, Ben Wallace had shoved him in the face. He didn't retaliate. Wallace had thrown 1,000 armbands, according to Jermaine O'Neal, at him. There was every racist taunt you can think of was thrown at the Pacers that whole night. I mean, how many buttons can you push on any human being until someone snaps? And, a drink in your face, doesn't matter if it's beer, soda, or whatever, what are you going to do? You're going to snap. I don't condone what he did, but I totally understand and comprehend why someone would make that decision. So
I thought real quick too, I thought that you did a good job of bringing in the fan because you had a fan. I'm like, who the hell is this fan? And then I realized afterwards, the way you set it up, I was like, oh, it's that fan, Well, go ahead.
Well, AJ, as a journalist, I got to try to get the other side of, the incident. I want to know why, who this man was and why he threw it. So that's why we really tried as hard as we could to get John Green, and it was a challenge to get him, but we were lucky we were able to get him.
It was worth it. It was gold, and we'll get to that at the end. But when you tied it all together, it's like, oh man, this was a money interview to help tell the whole story.
And look, John didn't have to talk to us. He's tired of the story as well, but. I think we were able to sell him on it because, look, we kept our word journalistically with him. Because, look, we know part of this story is that you and Ron became friends later and that you both shared your own inner demons and talked that shit out together, which we feel is important. And he was like, all right, if you guys bring that part in, I'll talk to you. But if you don't, you're going to be hearing from me. I'm like, relax. We're going to tell the story the right way. And he's like, all right, come to Detroit.
That was a great payoff. I want to go through an educational moment right now just for our listeners. You covered Ron's domestic violence incident in Sacramento. You had the 911 call. You had police reports. Walk us through that process and how do you get that content to be able to use in the film? I think this is a good teaching tool right here for our listeners.
Sure. I mean, we hit up every local affiliate in the area to see what they had. We also did a FOIA request to get the file of the case. So that's how we got all, the primary evidence for that scene. So,
and that's considered public record?
Yes. His domestic case is about 10% of it is redacted because there was a minor in the room. But yeah, that was public record. And then the news footage, obviously we had the license. I believe it was the local ABC or CBS footage and news station in Sacramento. They had covered it. So that's where we got the footage of that. So that's how we attacked that.
And the 911 call, is that's easily accessible?
Yeah, that's public record. We got that with the FOIA request. The police handed that over.
In another teaching point, walk us through the look. So I know that it's a process, right? You go through, you say, hey, this is how I want this whole doc to look from beginning to end, the font, everything. What was that process like for you? And then how long did this whole thing take you?
Well, the look of it is basically, I have to give credit to HSC TV, who I worked with for most of the film on this, both shooting and the post-production. The look of it was Rosie, who's the colorist at HSC TV. We had discussed basically saying, look, this has to have like a kind of dark, grimy feel, but nothing that feels like I don't want to like tear apart the footage or anything. We still got to have it look clean, but it's got to have this kind of like dark undertone to it. And Rosie's so good, that's all you have to tell her. And, she's Picasso with Da Vinci. So that really wasn't that much of a challenge at all to execute. Actually, it's totally fine. That was easy because I trust her 1,000%. And then as far as how long it took to get the whole thing done, from day of first shooting to final edit, 6.5 months.
That's a tight timeline.
Well, we got on a roll. A lot of it was also because really what takes the most time is the access, trying to get the access. And, I had probably the most underrated, sports reporter of the last 25 years help on this in Colleen Dominguez. And, she was arguably our MVP. And the reason we got Kobe, Lamar Odom, Chauncey Billups, and most importantly, who I think is the most important interview subject in this, Jermaine O'Neal, she got them. That's 1,000,000% credit to her and her, her amazing skill sets. So that's why it took 6.5 months, because everybody said yes to her pretty quickly, and we got the unfiltered, sit down access with limited time limits. Outside of Kobe was like, look, I can give you 20 minutes. I got a packed day, but I'll give you 20. I'm like, Kobe, we'll take 10. We don't care. Whatever you give us. So
yeah, I tell you what, watching his interview was just hard. You know what I mean? It was so good, but then you're just watching it, and it's just hard to watch. But what he was saying about Ron was just so genuine and touching that I thought that it was gold. And then, of course, I'm biased. I love Lamar Odom. I thought that interview was just so Lamar. Just the way he's so cool and so laid back and but it's good to know. I didn't know Colleen got all those interviews, but it's funny how you could tap into some person and they just help you, get all the people that you need for this story.
Yeah. I mean, but again, that's, Colleen and Omar and Tom Friend, the four of us were a team. So everybody knew their roles. It was a very ego-free group. Even the 3 DPs that were on it were John Malinsky, Mark James, and Brian Brousseau. I had
three of the best. Let me just say
the way Malinsky lit that gym is I don't know who else could do it better. Go back and look at Chauncey Billups' interview with the fireplace in the back. Malinsky lit it perfectly. So, when you have sometimes when you have the budget to bring in these artists that know how you work, how they work, it was a pretty easy process, honestly, an enjoyable process to make this film from start to finish when you have, just selfless teammates like that.
Yeah, I have to say the DPs you had on this doc, I was jealous, and I was just thinking about how much money you had to to use on it. It was amazing. I mean, 3 of the best in the country, without a doubt.
It cost some money, but those guys didn't tax me too hard. Just I've been working with all of them for over 10 years, and they know where all my bodies are buried. So,
did you interview Jermaine O'Neal, and what was that like? He was as real and salty and genuine as I've ever heard an athlete.
I was there on site producing. Colleen was in the chair interviewing him. So that sound was all her. Yeah, I mean he's the X factor of the film.
Did you expect him to be as upset and kind of bitter about Ron as he was?
Nope. I'm sitting there listening to this sound, and I undersell everything in this business. And I remember my boss on the project, Joe Yanarella, he hit me up and he was like, "How is Jermaine?" And I said, "We have an atomic bomb here." And he was like, I've never heard you be happy about any shoot that you've ever been on. And I'm like, "No, this is an atomic bomb." He left no stone unturned. I honestly can't believe he was this brutally honest. I think he showed a very human side on how, when some things that are out of your control impact what you do professionally, and then that stuff that impacts you personally. I thought Jermaine could not have been more courageously honest in that interview. And I thought that's how he came off. Because I think most people would just take the high road and, be like, Ron was being Ron, and, what are you going to do? Jermaine was like, "No, I was trying to win a fucking title. Like, that's what I was trying to do. And you and I are the best players on this team. I need you. And, how many times do we have to go down this road? Because, if you really break down the math, they probably should have won 2 titles."
Yeah, he was raw.
And, he was phenomenal. But I think the part that sounded so genuine was when, because there was a point early, Seth, where I thought he was a little bitter. But at the end, it kind of all came together when he was jealous of Ron having a friendship with the fan. And you realize, like, he never had that relationship with Ron. Like, that's really what he wanted, was just a relationship so he could know where the hell he's coming from. That was my interpretation.
Look, all teammates, I think, want to know where they stand with one another. I don't think everybody has to, be best friends and hang out and go to the movies together. There's plenty of teams that didn't personally get along but functioned well enough to easily win a title. But no, Ron was not social for most of until he got older and calmed down. He wasn't social at all. I think when he got older and he saw the younger players look up to him and wanted to learn from him, I think that's when he started opening up more. So when he was one of the older member of the Lakers, and the Nick Young, the Julius Randles were, picking his brain, I think that's when he started loosening up. And that's ironically around the same time him and Jermaine started patching things up, because he kept calling Jermaine and saying, I'm sorry. He basically said, "I'm sorry," both publicly and privately to him for almost 5, 6, 7 years. And then, they finally, to my knowledge, things are still patched up. But then again, I haven't spoken to either of them in 3, 4 years. So who knows what their friendship is like now. But at the time, it seemed like they had worked their things out.
I got to say one more person, that Steven Jackson was great. Like, his interviews were great. But when he told the story about Ron in the locker room, like, yo, we going to get in trouble? Yo, I lost it. So I couldn't stop laughing, because everything I've heard, Al Harris just told me, so other people have told me stories about Ron. It just made it seem all true. Like, he really thought, yo, we going to get in trouble?
We might be playing overseas.
And I didn't know a fight broke out. Like, that to me was revealing, in the locker room with the coaches and all of that. Like, that part, I had no clue. I'd never heard that.
No, at the time, that stuff was always kept in-house. But, I think after a while, the statute of limitations of letting some stuff out of the locker room loosens up. And that's how, because we interviewed Jermaine first. So when we asked Steven Jackson about, this, he was like, "Yep, that's true. It went like this," and verified it all. So, yeah, it was a serious situation, but with these dark comedic lines mixed in, you really got the ultimate multi-emotional impact of what Ron had, on this team. So, these guys are borderline television gold when they get in front of a camera. So
you bring up an interesting point. We talked to Billy Corbin, and he said the same thing. Sometimes you have to let distance grow, and he gave it a 10-year window. But for you, it had been over 10 years since the Malice in the Palace. So it felt like these guys were open or willing to talk about these things. I had never thought about it that way. Have you recognized that on this documentary or any other documentaries that you've worked on? You got to give it some time to ripen.
Yeah, I mean, I just went through that now with Mr. Cheeks and the Lost Boys. You know, it's been almost 20 years since Freaky Todd had been murdered. And Cheeks finally felt comfortable talking about it only within the last 2 years, because people don't really know, but he went through a lot of substance abuse trying to drink down the guilt of his murder. So yeah, I think you gotta, I mean, time doesn't heal all wounds, but time can put, a Band-Aid on it. And sometimes that's your best course of action.
Dope. That's all I have on the movie. AJ, you want to ask anything else?
Yeah, listen, I could go on and on.
About the championship or?
You know what? Yes. There were so many moments in the documentary that just took me back. Like, I was at the game in the Rucker Park when Ron and Elton Brand and all of them were on the same team, but there's no footage of that. Nobody was there shooting that. It was just like, a great game. And there was some stuff there. And, people have done some stories on it, but that particular game and those moments were just crazy.
The coach of that team has the footage, and because of what happened with Mr. Lorch and what went down,
they won't let it out.
Those tapes are in this legal purgatory area, from what I've been told. Look, if anyone gets their hands on those tapes, you have a ridiculous film, because really they are one of the reasons why AAU blew up, and now recruiters started really coming, because the year after them, Kobe formed his super team with Rip Hamilton and Tim Thomas. So and that domino effect kept growing and growing and growing. And now you basically have a league that is, an AAU affiliated NBA. So, hey, if anyone has it, good luck.
Hey, but I tell you what, there's some gold in there. I've heard stories about Mace on the bus rapping. Like, there's so many people that were involved on that Riverside team that ended up becoming superstars in other areas. So it's a really cool story if somebody's able to tell it.
Well, Anthony Mason was also LL Cool J's bodyguard whenever LL came back to Queens to perform and stuff. So that anecdote doesn't suck either.
Hey, we digress, but I want to end with one serious thing that I thought you did a good job of telling with the story, and you brought it full circle, is allowing the footage of Ron after they won the championship, talking about his psychologist, talking about those things, going into the press conference and having his family up there and just letting all of that. And it felt like you let it breathe a little longer than maybe normal, but I felt like it was right. And just letting us see how happy he was. Was that a decision that you had to fight for that time? Or you're just like, hey, I got to let this happen. And I got to tell this whole story by bringing it together with this piece.
In terms of the TRT on the film, I can't say enough great things about Showtime. They were very director friendly. Brian Daly was basically, whatever you feel is the best course of action, we trust you. So minimal notes from them. Obviously, I'm not used to that. At ESPN, I would, 100% of your vision was chopped down to 55% most times, because you have this circle of fire of 9 CPs and feature managers that all chime in. And look, a lot of the stuff they change works out for the better, and then other stuff is subjective. So no, I didn't have to fight for extra time on stuff like that. The reason why I wanted that to breathe was because Ron's dad said that he was in a manic state at that point. And that's why I wanted to, because he was on such a high, and then he utilized that high to inject an apology out there to Jermaine O'Neal, Steven Jackson, and the Pacers. So, I mean, that's why I didn't. I don't know if it worked. I hope so, but that was the reason why. It
definitely worked. And shouting out Queensbridge and Nori telling that crazy story. But yeah, it definitely worked.
Oh, well, Nori was like 3 white wines in when we interviewed him. You want to talk about the cutting room floor shit? The stuff we could not put in there is basically all from Nori. He was like, I can't. That stuff has to. I got to take some of that to the grave. But
yeah, no doubt. But you dropped a little bit in at the very end, and I was glad you did. When he was telling that story, I'm like, oh, he's great. He's just crazy right now.
Yeah, but it was too funny, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense in the story arc anywhere. It doesn't fit anywhere, so I asked, Showtime. I was like, can I insert something in the credits? And they're like, is it worth it? And I'm like, it's really funny, trust me. And they saw it and they were like, yeah, that's funny. Yeah, just go with it. So that's why we did it.
Awesome film. Awesome film. Really shining a spotlight on mental illness. Probably the first film that's done that. And now we're starting to see more of those as far as sports documentaries. But definitely check out Quiet Storm, the Ron Artest Story on Showtime. All right, Johnny, we're going to get into Act 3. These are quick hitters. You don't have to deep dive. First question. What's your biggest strength as a filmmaker?
I'd say being ego-free and listening to other people's thoughts and picking which changes work and which ones don't, if that makes any... Because everybody, it's a subjective thing. It's a subjective field anyway. So people are going to have emotional opinions on storytelling. So I think I've learned to compartmentalize what feedback works and what feedback doesn't.
You know, we asked people, do they prefer voiceovers or sound bites? But you've already answered that question with your Sean Taylor example, I assume. So I'm going to ask you, favorite person you would like to have dinner with, filmmaker, writer, whomever?
Probably Ezra Edelman. Never met him, but I love all of his films. If he's available for his brain to be picked, happy to do so. Because I've already met Sasha Jenkins and speak with him. So Ezra's up next. He's the LeBron of our lane. I would vote it. I would definitely vote Ezra.
For someone who wants to be the next Johnny Sweet, what piece of advice would you give them?
Shit, I don't know. It's such a different time period now in terms of how to get here. Because I grew up in the traditional media market, and that's been annihilated. These new lanes of digital and social media and these different forms of storytelling. I don't know. I'd say me, if you're trying to be me, I hope you're not trying to be me exactly because I've made way too many mistakes. But I'd say your loyalty to the story is always number one. It's not to the subject that you're covering. It's not to some other aspect of or person in the film that you're trying to make look better. Your loyalty is to the story 100%, and your journalistic integrity has to stay ironclad strong. Because my fear with this industry nowadays is we're not seeing as many documentaries anymore. We're seeing hagiographies. They're basically PR films. That's my fear that this lane is going down because the authenticity, I think, is taking a lot of hits these days. Like, when we see films coming out and the person the film's about is an executive producer.
You were able to balance that well.
I'm trying. It's tough, man. It's tough because there's
I'm saying with Ron, you put it all out there as far as I was concerned.
Look, there's a lot of things in the film Ron wanted taken out. And I was like, the story will be, won't be told correctly. And he also wanted all of his music to score the film. No one's watching it. If we score the music, he's probably going to yell at me if he sees this.
No one's going to hear that. No one's going to listen to our podcast. Though.
I'm not here. And Ron, if you're listening, we want to have you on too. Come on. Hit me up.
I have him on. It'll tear me up probably. It'll be good. It'll be good podcast viewership. Loyalty to the story, man. I really hope this industry turns back towards I like what's happening visually. Don't get me wrong. Like the way stories are being told from a visual standpoint, it's night and day from what it was 20, 30 years ago. But I really wanted to get back to the hardcore journalistic side. And because right now, I think we're in trouble. So I think we need to get back more towards the Ken Burns way of telling the straight up truth and let's see where the cards lie. But, I get it. People got to make money and people make sacrifices. I'm
going to take you back to it's not really a quick hitter because it's a loaded question, but top 5 rappers. You're a DJ. Give it to me.
All right. Nas, Pac, Big.
There's no wrong answer.
Oh, there's always wrong answers. This is in no particular order except for number 1. Mr. Cheeks is in my top 5 just based off storytelling alone. I don't think he gets enough credit for Renee and how Renee actually built a lane for so many other MCs like Ja Rule, 50 Cent, Fabulous, and all others who wanted to go and talk about emotional issues in relationships that before had been considered soft. My favorite rapper of all time is DMX. I don't think he's the best rapper of all time, but I think for me and a lot of people of my generation, he was our Bob Dylan because he was far more relatable than any other MC. He was the most flawed human of all these MCs that showed his flaws to everybody. So to me, emotionally, DMX is my favorite MC, will always be my favorite MC. From a technical standpoint, Jay-Z is amazing, but is Jay-Z relatable? Like, can we really relate to Jay-Z? He's this epic story of rags to riches billionaire, whereas DMX is someone who made mistakes and so human. I'd definitely go with X.
And you know what? I labeled it wrong. I should say your favorite 5 because I don't think there's a wrong answer when it comes to your favorite 5. Because to me, my favorite, your number 1 and my number 1 are the same. After that, it doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah, I think the most game-changing MC ever is Rakim. That's what I think is the most game-changing MC. Before Rakim, you had rhyming was in a certain direction, and then when Rakim came out, everybody had to move around and adjust. So I'd say Rakim is definitely the most game-changing rapper. To me, again, this is subjective. People who hear this are probably like, this guy's full of shit. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Nah, not real hip-hop fans.
But outside of that, those are my guys.
Our next season of Beyond the Lens, we're gonna want to have you on. Tell us a little bit about your Lost Boys project and when can we expect that to hit the market?
We're wrapped and the film is done. Don't know when it's going to hit the market. We worked on that with All Rise Films and the Zimbalists. So honestly, they know more than I do about the status of that stuff. I'm hoping it's out next year. I love the story. It's another Queen story. I promise everybody I'm not going to be doing Queen stories the rest of my life. I will branch out. We do have another film out that's called Last Call, which is in the festival circuits now. That's actually about how the COVID outbreak annihilated the hospitality industry in New York City. So we do have that. That should be making its festival debuts in New York all summer.
Good luck to you, Johnny, man. I appreciate your time. And I'm looking forward to watching that doc on Mr. Cheeks. Because with you, Renee, to me, is one of the best storytelling raps, ever. Even to this day, when I hear it, I'm just like, it was so well done. It was just crafted well. It's just a really good story. So I'll put it right there with all of them.
Dude, you know who his uncle was? It blew my fucking mind.
No, who?
Gil Scott-Heron.
Get out of here.
Gil, well, not blood related. He was.
Yeah. Listen, it's always like that. It's a cousin.
They always related.
Yeah. He was with his aunt for a long time. But no, Gil Scott-Heron, taught him how to write poetry.
Oh, shit. That's how he learned how to frame stuff. Gotcha.
That's how he learned how to, do his bar structure and his storytelling techniques. So,
Lights, camera, action, right? Lights, camera, action, Mr. Cheeks.
Oh, yeah.
That was his big commercial hit.
I'm sorry I turned this into a partly hip hop, but you, Johnny, you're in my wheelhouse.
He going season 2.
Oh, yeah, but this whole documentary to me, it speaks to that, Johnny. I think you just did a nice job because I'm from Virginia, but I went to school in Jersey, and hip hop was so big at that time. So it ties into the hoops and the basketball and all those Ron and Skip and all. You could do a Skip story if you want to go back to Queens. All those stories are just there. You know what I mean? So for me, I highly recommend to anyone listening to go check out this documentary because it was very well done.
Well, again, you guys are happy. I feel like
Johnny, we appreciate your time, and we are wrapped. A special thanks to Johnny Sweet for the deep dive into his doc, A Quiet Storm, the Ron Artest Story, and drop in some serious Queensbridge hip-hop game. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show, and if you do, we'll give you a big shout-out or even bring you on. If you like what you heard, please share with your friends. We'll be back next week with another great episode of Beyond the Lens, and that's a wrap. And I'd like to give a special thanks to our editors, Jacob Gorenberg and Andrew Holman, and our production assistant, Candace Evans.